So good morning and hello, my name is Robert Friend. Welcome to this live session taking place on our last day of the Northamptonshire Health and Care Partnership Virtual Wellbeing Festival. I hope that you've enjoyed lots of sessions so far this week and are looking forward to the lineup that we have planned for you today. Today's session is called We Matter Too, putting compassion into practice as health and care staff. We spend so much of our time looking after and caring for others, it can feel uncomfortable taking time out to focus on ourselves. Sameen and Anna, who will be leading this session on compassion-based approaches and how we can put them into practice for ourselves. I'm going to be supported by my colleagues Dave and Louise, who will be working behind the scenes to ensure a smooth running of this live session. Before we get started, I just wanted to run through some logistics on how this live session is going to be facilitated. I'm sure many of us over the last 12 to 18 months have become very familiar with using Microsoft Teams. You will have noticed that your cameras and microphones have been switched off. However, we will be switching these back on shortly so you can play an active part in the session. Please use the chat box to share your thoughts and reflections throughout the session, and in particular to ask any questions you may wish to ask Sameen and Anna. The team and I will ask your questions on your behalf, or alternatively, if you'd like to ask the question yourself, please use the raise your hand function and we will invite you to join Sameen and Anna on the screen. If you do not have access to the raise your hand function, please post in the chat box that you would like to ask a question and we will invite you to switch on your camera. You will already have noticed that we are recording today's session. This is so that it can be viewed by colleagues who haven't been able to join us this morning. Also, if you have a hearing impairment, you can turn on the live captions for this session by clicking on the three dots, which can be found at the top of your screen, and selecting Turn on Live Captions. Please note that this function is only available on computers using the Microsoft Teams apps. So unfortunately, this is not a feature on iPhone or other mobile devices. So before we start the question, we've been asked to ask you all a question. And this question is, what are the qualities of being compassionate? Now, my colleague Louise will post the link to Slido in the chat box, or alternatively, you can hold your camera on your mobile phone up to the QR code that's on the screen, and this will open Slido for you. Please type in your responses. We can see already we've got caring coming through. So please post as many different words, those qualities of being compassionate, to create our word cloud. Okay, so we've got an array of words coming through. So please continue to share. Thank you. If you haven't been able to get onto Slido, please post into the chat box as well, and we can have a look at those as well as we go through. So we can see understanding, empathic are the popular words at the moment. We've also got thoughtful, non-judgmental, caring, helpful, be kind. I'll just see if there's any what's coming through in the chat as well. So we've got warmth, self-evaluation, empathy and active listening, time and space for others, empathy. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so Sameen and Anna, is there anything you'd like to add at this point, or is this more, we're going to pick this up later on in the session as well?
I think we're going to pick this up a little bit later in the session as well, but thank you all for those responses. Really, really good to get some of those responses there, so that's fantastic. Thank you very much for doing that. Yeah.
And if I can, I'm going to take a picture of the screen just so that we can come back to it. And there you go. That's what I'm doing at the moment. So yeah, when we'll come back to this in the session, and like Anna said, pick up on the themes.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay. So at this point, I'm really delighted to hand over to Dr. Sameen Malik, so clinical psychologist, and Dr. Anna Richards, counselling psychologist, who will be leading this session. So over to you both.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. And we're going to do that awkward thing now where we're going to share the screen and have a bit of a switch over. So while I do that and make sure I'm sharing the right thing, Anna, can you, is that up?
Perfect.
Perfect. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. So yeah, as Robert said, my name's Sameen, and I'm joined by my colleague Anna, and we're going to be with you for the next sort of 50 minutes or so, doing this session together. So as Robert said, we work in health and social care, and we spend most of our time really just thinking about other people. And the Wellbeing Festival, what's great about it is it gives us a chance to pause, I suppose, take a breath, and begin to think about taking care of ourselves. And if you're anything like us, what you've probably been doing is taking on board what you've heard and thinking about how you might apply it to other people, to patients, to clients, to colleagues, to teams, your organisations. But what we really hoped is that this session would be a space for you, as you are, and we'd really love to invite you to bring your whole selves into this space. And it can be really uncomfortable thinking about ourselves, especially when we think we should be prioritising other people. But of course, as we've titled the session, you matter too, and so taking space for ourselves is important. And if it helps us to think about this as giving us a chance to recharge, to reconnect with ourselves, in order for us to be able to do the work, then that's okay too. So just hold in mind whatever it is that might motivate you to give yourself the focus of this space right now, when time is so generous.
Okay, brilliant. So we're just going to start with a grounding exercise, and I'm going to invite you to participate in this. It's not compulsory, but I'm going to invite you to start by sitting with grace and dignity, and whatever that means to you. For me, that means sitting upright with both feet on the floor, with my hands resting in my lap. You don't have to close your eyes, but you can if you'd like to. As we sit here, I'm now going to invite you to take a couple of deep breaths. So ideally breathing into your tummy and taking some nice deep breaths. So if you'd like to take a couple of deep breaths now. And just to take a moment to notice how you're sitting. You might not feel comfortable, and that's okay. And you don't have to feel calm. We just want you to take a moment to notice what arises. Notice how busy or still your mind is. Notice colleagues. Notice that you've arrived in this virtual space as well. And then just to welcome you all to this space.
So whenever we're doing anything interactive, it's really important to think about what we need to make it feel safe for us to engage. And so just to put out there at the beginning that this isn't intended to be a soul-bearing exercise at all. Nothing we're going to say is inviting you to share your experience if you would rather not do that. It's, we're acknowledging that the session is being recorded, so welcome to colleagues as well who might be watching this on catch-up on demand afterwards. And so, there are limits to the confidentiality in the space that we can offer. So it's always okay to pass. Nobody ever has to say anything if you don't like to. And it's okay for people to have different experiences. And so we might ask some questions, and people have got that different experience than something somebody else might have said, and that's okay. And I suppose what the aim of today's session and what we're hoping to achieve is just that connection with one another. So those moments where you sort of go, oh yeah, actually that I feel like that too, or you might go, oh, that's interesting. I didn't experience that, or it wasn't like that for me. And to just kind of have that space to think about some of the differences and sort of sit with it. So absolutely share as much as you feel comfortable to, but you don't have to say anything and you don't have to participate if you would rather not. So first of all, what we're going to do is have a think about how things have been over the last year. And the analogy that lots of you will have heard already is this idea that COVID has been the same storm that we've all been in, but in different boats. And this is probably, Anna and I were talking, this has probably aged me a little bit. So hopefully most of you will remember the film Titanic. It's this idea here, I suppose, of we've all been in different boats. And so some of us, or people that we might have known about or have seen on the news and in the telly, it might have been in the cruise liners, where lockdown happened, people were on furlough, you were living by the beach, you were meditating every day, doing yoga, living your best lives and finding yourselves and feeling like you were having the time of your lives. Whereas for many of us, that felt completely alien to be living in that way. And we felt like possibly Rose on the door, you know, just about hanging on and hanging in there, or possibly Jack in the ocean, in the sea, just clinging on for dear life, going, move over, I want to get on too. And, you know, our secure bases and what we've known in the world have changed, and they've turned completely upside down. And I suppose what's interesting and what I'm finding and what we're experiencing is that not many of us have stayed in the same boat over that time. We might have started off in one place, but at certain points have moved on to another one. We might have gone up in the world in terms of the quality of our boats, and we might have come down at different points in our lives. And it's raised loads of emotions for each of us, and so it's been difficult. It's been a really moving 15 or longer months or so.
So now I'm just going to invite you all to think about the metaphor that Sameen just talked about there, and thinking about for yourself, and inviting you to spend a little bit of time to reflect on how things have been for you. So perhaps before the pandemic, and then thinking back to, you know, how things started with the first lockdown perhaps, and then with the subsequent waves, and what that was like for you, being in and out of lockdown, perhaps, you know, at work and at home. It might have been that you were working at home, and things changed for you a lot, perhaps. So just spending a little bit of time now thinking about which boat I have been in, which boat you have been in, how it changed or how it stayed the same. Do things feel better or worse, or perhaps just different? And what it felt like for you at that time. And I think, Sameen, do we have a Slido for this, or is...
We do, yeah. I think Robert's going to share this.
Oh, brilliant.
It's just up now for you.
Just up now, so fantastic. So please do, I think, should there be a link in the chat as well?
Yeah, so Louise will post that link in as well, or use the link that was there from the earlier Slido. But yes, people are starting to put the words in now as well.
Yeah, and feel free to put things in the chat as well. So yeah, so a lot of difficult things for people. So not many people are like in the first picture, in the metaphor of people on, you know, enjoying themselves on a cruise ship. So it sounds like a lot of people being on a roller coaster, scared, isolated. So isolated seems to be the one that seems to be coming up there quite strongly. Tired, quiet. interestingly safe from coercion there. So quite an interesting, sorry, it's moving around slightly there. So someone's identified as being a happy hermit there as well. But it sounds like the predominant themes there are isolated, lonely. I'm just seeing in the chat there, we've got urgent from Arabella, intense there from Claire, and we've got isolated as well. So a lot of, but some positives as well. So time to think, perhaps there. No pressure to do things, enjoying own space. So it does sound like that, you know, different people have had quite different experiences, and it might be that people do feel a couple of these different things. They might feel isolated, but might feel that they don't have so many pressures as well at the same time. So it might be some positive and negative things there. Fantastic, brilliant. Thank you all for sharing. That's really helpful. Sameen, do you have any thoughts about the
scared? I've just noticed scared is coming up, and I think certainly something that I've experienced has been multiple, like loads of these at different times, sometimes within the same hour even, where you sort of feeling okay, things are all right, they're going okay, I'm enjoying the quiet time, and then all of a sudden that feeling of, oh, actually I feel really isolated, with, you know, within the same hour even, never mind over a period of time. And so I'm wondering if people have felt some of the highs and the lows and the bits in between, and it is confusing. I don't know if there's many situations where, you know, the entire population has felt this roller coaster of confusion, and it's been so different and yet similar, but so different at the same time. Thank you for sharing those. If I go back to sharing, I think a couple more are still coming through. Yeah, frustrated.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know people are still mulling over this, and hopefully there'll be opportunity later on in the session as well to come back to how some of this is felt. So hold these in mind as we go through. So I'm going to start sharing from my slides again, and hopefully that will be up.
Brilliant. So yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So just bringing everyone's attention to this, we thought this was like a good encapsulated what you know some people's experience might have been through the pandemic. So I'm just going to read it out for people who might not be able to see that. But it says the cold of winter. So it's a chap holding a big or a person holding a big boulder on their back, and it sort of says the cold of winter, plus a lack of sunlight, plus lockdown, plus the uncertain future, plus the whole of the last year generally, plus the unrelenting news cycle, plus the email that you've been putting off, plus the lack of human contact, plus some other shit you can't quite put your finger on. And then the chap's the person saying, can't work out why I'm feeling so tired lately. And I think that sort of in many ways encapsulates you know, some people's experience of the pandemic, that, you know, there's been so much that people have been carrying that sometimes it takes a while. Yeah, I'm seeing a few thumbs up there, to sort of take stock and reflect on how it's been, and then to think about the impact that it has had on all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people are expecting to come to this session about compassion, and we were going to give you strategies to take some of this away and kind of put the boulder down, there may be things that you can take from this, but unfortunately that's not really what the next slide is about to say. So just a bit of a disclaimer that that really the reality of life is that it's often short, unfair and tragic. You know, we're shaped by the environment and the circumstances that we find ourselves in, and sometimes these are really positive and uplifting and moving and you know, great, and we feel happy, but sometimes we don't. And the reality of life is that we don't choose the hand that we're dealt with, but we still kind of have to sit down and play, even if we don't want to at times. And the analogy that comes to mind is particularly when you have children, for example, and you're just tired and you don't want to do the things that you know you need to do, but finding some strength from somewhere to carry on is really difficult. And it's no wonder some of the things that were coming up were in terms of feeling, you know, isolated and tired and tiring. I noticed coming up quite a lot, and kind of exhausted, and carrying all that emotional weight on top of everything else that we might then have to do or not be able to do is really difficult. And I think it'd be really, it would be doing everyone a disservice, and it'd be really dishonest if we said, you know, we could make that go away by being compassionate. You know, we could forget it, we could ignore it, and we could fix it, because actually we can't. It's not a thing to be fixed. It's the reality of life, really. But what can help is that connection with other people. So hopefully just even the experience of relating to other people and connecting with the idea that, gosh, it isn't just me, that actually lots of us are feeling like this. And even though we might be in different boats at different times, there's a shared understanding that this is just difficult at the moment. And this isn't easy, of course. Engaging with that suffering is difficult. It's really hard. And I noticed that empathy came up a lot when Robert asked the question about what is compassion. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference at a point later on. But there is a distinction, and this idea that if you're empathic and you're constantly giving without being compassionate towards yourself, that's the thing that is exhausting. That's the thing that burns us out. And so people often talk about compassion fatigue, whereas what the research and the literature is saying is that it's empathy without being compassionate towards yourself and other people. That's the thing that's tiring. It's constantly giving without having a space to recharge for ourselves. So it's the empathy that fatigues us and burns us out. And life has a lot of difficulties that requires some empathy, even if it's for ourselves and not other people. And so it's really difficult. And so if we think back to the person that was carrying the boulder in the previous slide, if that's one of us, and we're sat there thinking, gosh, we need a bit of help, we need some support with this, we need to find somebody that can help us with this boulder. And you kind of consider the scenario where you're trying to find somebody to speak to, and the first person you come across says, you know, actually, I'll fix everything for you. I'll just tell you to drop it, drag you into work, no messing about, crack on with everything that you need to do. Just forget everything on the boulder, just put it down. You'll be absolutely fine and carry on. And then you're sort of thinking, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I can do that, but I don't know if I can ignore everything that's in that boulder, in that thing on my back. And you think, right, okay, actually, maybe that's not the way to go for me. I need to find somebody else. And you find the second person, and the second person says, oh, gosh, yeah, that's really awful. Yeah, I really don't want you to be sad. Hang on, there, pat you on the shoulder. Let me take all of that from you. Let me take that away from you, and you can just be happy again. And for a moment, you might think, actually, this is great. Somebody's taken all this stuff away from me, and I don't have to worry about any of it. But at some point, you'll start wondering, what happened to that thing that I had, you know, that email that I needed to send, or what happened to, you know, the event that I needed to go to that I was worrying about, but actually I was looking forward to bits of that. And at some point you realise you can't just have somebody that takes everything away from you, because that leaves you feeling quite disempowered and helpless. And so neither of them really is helpful or sustainable in the long run. I mean, the first is just plain mean, very dismissive. And like I said, the second one might appear sympathetic to begin with, but over time actually feels quite disempowering. Whereas if you then find the third person, and you can probably see where this is going, is a sort of a bit of a balance. And this person kind of walks alongside you and says, actually, that sounds really heavy. You know, there's so much going on. Where did all this come from? You know, and out of all the things that you're carrying on your back, which of the stones is the hardest bit? You know, which are the things that might feel more manageable? Which are the things that you need to carry? Should you be carrying all of those? Are there any that you can put down? And actually, what are you even walking towards? Why are you walking? Where are you going? And so it's this idea that the person isn't answering those questions for you, but is kind of walking alongside you and sitting with you and trying to understand where you might be coming from. So we talked earlier about the qualities of compassion, and the things that came up were things like empathy, understanding. What else did I write down, take a photo of? Non-judgmental, listening, kindness. And these are all things that actually we've probably got down to a T. The ones that we came up with earlier were kind of wisdom. And this isn't this is not a definitive list. So, but empathy and understanding, absolutely. Strength, courage, When we've done this exercise before, people often talk about wisdom. And these are things that actually we're probably really good at doing for other people. If you think about the roles that we're in, what we do for our families, what we do for our colleagues, actually we're pretty good at doing all of these things. But the question sometimes we find ourselves asking is, what about for ourselves? Yeah.
Sameen, I don't know if you've got, just drawing your attention to the comment. Have you seen that from Sarah?
Oh, I can't see the comments, but yeah, feel free to share, Anna.
So I think Sarah's asking, please could you expand more on the comment, empathy without compassion is exhausting.
Okay, yeah. We'll come on to that in a couple of slides time. So yeah, thank you, Sarah. Is there anything else coming through on the chat?
Michael said that he found it a very interesting and relatable analogy, so that was helpful. And David said that the previous slide, I think, said it was excellent, thought-provoking.
Yeah. So what we know, I suppose, in the roles that we have in health and social care is we're really good at being compassionate to other people. You know, that's what we do, that's what our roles are. But for ourselves, it can feel really tricky. Is it a luxury? Is it something that we can indulge in? Sometimes there's a sense that it makes me feel weak. Do I need it? Do I need to be compassionate towards myself? Do I need to show myself that empathy and understanding? Because I'm the strong one. You know, I'm the one that's there for everybody else. I don't really have time for this because I'm too busy to support other people. So yeah, you know, it is important, but you know, I don't really have space for that luxury, is often what we say to ourselves. But I suppose the question is at what cost to ourselves? You know, if we're not able to recharge our batteries and have our needs met, where might that leave us in terms of being able to support other people? And I suppose it sometimes makes me wonder about who our role models are for compassion. So I don't know if people want to put in the chat who they might think of. So if we think about who the people are that we look up to when we think about compassion, who are the kind of maybe famous people from history that we think might be kind of the gold standard of being compassionate, being kind and empathic and understanding and brave and courageous. Generally, sometimes people say things like Gandhi. Florence Nightingale, perhaps. Some comments coming through, Anna.
Yeah, so we've had Maya Angelou.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's found it's at the moment. But I think you mentioned Gandhi and other people there as well that we might.
Yeah, sometimes Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, these sorts of figures. And yeah, yep. Absolutely Maya Angelou as well. So yep. some more might come through. And I suppose the reason this is important to think about, you know, who are our ideals of compassion, is often the role models that we think of that come to mind are these really famous, heroic, almost ethereal sometimes, larger than life characters who have saved the world. And again, the question is at what cost to them? And also, were they perfect? You know, did they have easy lives and were they happy? Because Maya Angelou had some really difficult experiences in her life. You know, she wasn't, you know, this perfect character. If you think about Gandhi, there are certain communities that really didn't like some of Gandhi's ideas and views. They didn't think he was peaceful because he didn't include them. and Mother Teresa, Florence Nightingale. You know, we hear these positive stories about them, but were they always okay? And did they take time for themselves? Marie Curie sometimes comes up, but she died. She died doing the work that she does. And so, you know, whether she, you know, this is conjecture, I suppose, but whether she thought it was a luxury to take care of herself because she had such important work to do, and we're grateful for that. But I suppose the question is that if that's our idea of who compassionate figures are, or role models of kindness, or you know, health and care providers that we look up to, it just sounds really exhausting. It sounds really exhausting, and it sounds like it might be something that we couldn't possibly reach, which is really difficult if that's the idea that we hold for ourselves. And so I think, yeah, just I suppose sometimes just reflecting on that.
We've had a few more in the chat as well. So we've got the Dalai Lama, David Attenborough, Pema Chaldron, Marcus Rashford as well.
Yeah, yeah. And what I really like about some of these answers coming through is they're people that I think one of the reasons why they're so revered is because they're human. You know, they put themselves out there, but they often are vulnerable as well. And they're not, the narrative around them isn't that they're perfect, but they're loved for their humanity and the work that they do.
Brilliant. So we've got this little slide here, sort of just encapsulating in a nutshell, just sort of a definition of what compassion might be. So compassion is the courage to descend into the reality of human experience, and that can be you know, the suffering of human experience as well as the joy and the more positive aspects of life as well, and human experience. But it's not just taking that sort of rosy tinted view of reality, that it's you know, purely a positive thing. And that's from Paul Gilbert, who's the founder of Compassion Focused Therapy. And he talks about how compassion has been something that for thousands of years has been an antidote to suffering and harmfulness in life. And that research is now showing that our capacities to be compassionate have evolved, how it works in our bodies and brains, and when it's cultivated, how it can be a source of courage and wisdom to address suffering. And Sameen's going to come on to a little bit of this in a moment. And compassion can also be thought of as a sensitivity to suffering in self and others, with a commitment to try to alleviate and prevent it. So I think it's important to notice that you know, we've mentioned courage there a little bit as well, and to engage with the suffering in other people as well as ourselves. And I think that's something very important that we're going to look at.
Absolutely. I think sometimes people see compassion as one thing, whereas it's sometimes useful to split it off into the two underlying psychological mechanisms behind compassion. And this is where some distinctions between empathy in and of its own might be considered. So to be compassionate requires two things. The first is absolutely that ability to approach and engage with the suffering. So as Anna said, that sensitivity to what that might feel like for ourselves and what other people and for other people, what the causes are. When we thought about that person with a thing on his back, and thinking about walking alongside somebody. And so the compassionate approach to that is to understand, well, what's going on? Where is this coming from? Why does it feel such a difficulty for you at the moment? It's the same thing for two people might feel at very different levels of pain or distress. And so absolutely the first bit is approaching and engaging with that suffering. And lots of empathy sits there. In terms of really trying to kind of feel what somebody else is feeling. But the second bit that really matters is then the desire and the motivation to alleviate the suffering and do something about it, to whether that's to uproot its causes, whether that's to seek to prevent it in the future, whether that's to offer strategies. And although it might sound like, well, we kind of do that anyway, I suppose the compassionate approach is doing them alongside each other. And so sometimes what happens is we have this real desire and motivation. If someone says they're upset, to go, right, this is what we're going to do to fix it. These are the strategies that we're going to use. This is how we're going to manage it. We're just going to crack on, and we're going to give you all the strategies and the tools to not make you feel like this. And although that might come from a positive place, it might come from a place that's really supportive and empathic. Sometimes it errs more to the first example of the person just going, yep, let's just crack on with things. It's fine. Compassion requires that period of time where you're sitting and engaging with it and really understanding it, to enable you to then alleviate that suffering, or sit with the suffering if it can't be alleviated, in a way that's understood and really engaged with. And both of those things, to do them, is really difficult. And the reason it's really difficult is because it requires us to tap into what some of our own vulnerabilities might be. And so when we sit with somebody else's suffering, we might not have had those same experiences, but we can kind of feel sometimes what it feels like to be upset. And so it's the sense that sometimes when you see somebody else crying and you feel really moved yourself, and you're not really sure why they're crying, you're not really sure what's happening, but you can just really sense that something awful that they're experiencing something really quite painful, and you're moved as well. And so there's that sort of unconscious almost understanding. And so there's a sense that you're engaging with the suffering already. To then understand it and then try and support somebody is really where compassion comes into its own. So those two things really sit alongside one another when we're being compassionate. So there are three, I suppose, ways that this can happen. So there's three flows of compassion. The first is the one that we're all really good at. We can be compassionate, we can flow from ourselves to other people. So this is when somebody might come to you with a problem, or they might be upset or distressed, or they might be really happy actually even, and really excited, and you're able to share that strength and that wisdom and that knowledge and that kindness and compassion with them. The bits that are harder sometimes is flowing compassion to yourself. So how do we take some of those that strength and that wisdom and the courage that we apply to other people and apply it to ourselves? And that sometimes can be really challenging. And the other way that compassion can flow is from other people to ourselves. And sometimes that bit's really difficult as well. So there'll be times in most of our lives, certainly I can think of times, where what you've really probably wanted is a hug from somebody, or some compassion from somebody else. And somebody tries to approach you with that and says, oh, and pulls a face or goes to hug you, and you're like, no, don't. If you touch me, if you say something nice to me, I'm going to fall apart. And it's really difficult sometimes to accept compassion from other people. And some of that, I wonder sometimes whether it comes from not being able to do that for ourselves, and also not having had those experiences. And so sometimes the two of them are linked. If we're not able to receive that from other people, it's hard to hold that template for ourselves. And if we can't do that for ourselves, and it feels really difficult to do that for ourselves, then sometimes it's harder to accept that from other people as well. And so I think, Anna, you were going to do an exercise for people. Is that right?
I can do. Do you think we've got time to do this one? I mean, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I think we probably can.
Brilliant.
Shall we? Yeah, let's do it, and then I'll speed up through another one.
Sure. Okay. So what I'd like everyone to do is just to bring to mind someone that you really like, someone that you would, just instinctively do something for them. So it could be a family member, it could be your partner, it could be someone you know, a friend, that sort of thing. And I just want you to just spend a moment imagining compassion flowing from yourself to them, and feeling compassionate towards them if they were perhaps struggling. And now I'd like you to just bring to mind someone who might irritate or annoy you. Again, that could be a friend or a family member, or someone else. Could be anyone, but someone who might irritate you or bring up some difficult feelings. Someone that might come to mind. And then I just want you to bring your attention to and think about compassion flowing from yourself to them. And now to think about yourself. To think about yourself and to think about compassion flowing from yourself to yourself. And just to spend a moment thinking about that. I wonder, do we have time for reflections, do you think, or?
Wonder what that was like for people, and how was it easy? Was it challenging?
I think sometimes if we're not used to compassion going towards ourselves, that can be more difficult, and also people that we might struggle with as well at times as well. So it might first made me feel loved, second made me feel angry, third made me feel awkward. Yeah, so great feedback there.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the second one, thinking about someone who you might struggle with, might actually leave you feeling, quite angry, as you say, trying to do that even. So that's real struggle there. And also the third one, feeling quite awkward. So I think that's a really interesting reflection, just how that can feel quite unusual for people to direct compassion towards themselves. And I think that's quite a common experience. Someone saying that the second one made me feel sad. Yeah. And yes. And Claire's saying that it's useful to be able to generate brief feelings of compassion, even for people we dislike. So actually there is some benefit to be able to being compassionate to people that we struggle with. It was harder to stay with the third one as well. Yeah. So we might be very practiced at being compassionate towards people that we like, or that might be part of our role in work, that sort of thing. But something that we might struggle with ourselves in particular. Yeah, and just got someone saying that it was lovely exercise to do consciously and to make a bit of time for. And I think that's one of the things that actually developing time and space to be compassionate towards ourselves can be quite effortful at times.
Yeah, and so I'm sure lots of things will still be coming through, and but absolutely this and being able to sit with some of that and engage with how difficult that is part of being compassionate towards yourself. And so I kind of made a joke earlier on about, we're not going to give you things that suddenly make you feel compassionate and well and okay again. But that awkwardness is part of compassion. So recognizing that actually this is really difficult is part of being self-compassionate. And so compassion isn't about love or liking. It's not about removing the suffering. It isn't about being relaxed. It is linked with oxytocin and that kind of feeling of love and understanding and care. But interestingly, oxytocin is also the same hormone that makes Mothers love their children, so when you've sort of given birth, there's a rush of oxytocin, but it's also the same hormone that makes mothers be angry and aggressive towards other people that might be harming their children. And so compassion really is tough. It's kind and it's empathic and it's understanding, but it's also really tough. It's about using that strength and wisdom and commitment and courage to face some of those issues. And so that awkwardness and that anger, sometimes there's parts of ourselves that we don't particularly like, and showing compassion to those parts of ourselves can be really difficult and can make us feel angry and sad and have all those emotions. And so this is really difficult work. And I said earlier, it would have been a disservice for Anna and I to come here and say, here's how you take care of yourselves, go for a walk, do these lovely things without first engaging. And actually, this is really difficult work. So I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to probably whiz through a couple of slides, but I'm glad people found that exercise useful to do. But yeah, my apologies for quickly going through the next couple to keep to time. So all of those feelings and those emotions that we have, one way of conceptualizing them is in this sort of system, which again comes from compassion-focused work from the psychology field. And so it talks about having these 3 emotional regulation systems. So one is the drive system, and that's the system that really helps us act, to attain goals, to achieve things. And that's really linked to dopamine, where we get that sense of achievement, that excitement, we get stuff done. And there'll be probably lots of people on this call who can relate to that. This sense that we turn up to work, we provide health and care, we get our spreadsheets done, we manage things, we tick boxes, and that feels really great. There's another system, which is the threat system, and some of the emotions that were raised earlier today kind of sit in that seat. And so anger and sadness sometimes can come from a place of threat, where things don't feel safe, things feel really risky. We try to protect ourselves. This is where adrenaline and cortisol can come up. We feel really tense, we feel really nervous, we feel really stressed, and it just doesn't really feel that pleasant. But there's also then the soothing system, and this is where the oxytocin can come in. So that's where we feel calm, we feel eased, we feel relaxed and content, safe, cared for, but also connected to one another. So soothing isn't all about just being okay and being relaxed and meditating and having a great time. Part of the soothing is that connection. And so sometimes that connection is really positive, other times it feels really difficult, but it's about having that sense of, okay, it's not just me, there's other people also experiencing this. It's very much a part of soothing. And in an ideal world, all 3 of them are quite balanced. And so if there's a threat to the system, you do something about it, you feel connected, and it feels manageable. You can kind of tolerate it within a certain window. But at times that doesn't quite happen. And we've all really had an experience of this in our various boats over the pandemic, but of course in everyday life as well. And what we tend to find we end up doing is, whether the threat is real or perceived, it can be practical, it can be emotional, it can be about us, it can be about other people. Sometimes we have a lot of threat in our lives that makes us feel unsafe. And what tends to happen, particularly for those of us that work in health and care, is we can get caught up in this threat-based overdrive, where we're so stuck in our threat that we try and do everything we possibly can to alleviate that threat, to try and not think about it, to try and resolve it, to try and fix it. We might spend extra time at work, we might drill all our focus into resolving the threat. We might avoid the threat altogether and start being productive in other ways, but the threat is still there and the overdrive is still happening. But what's happening at that point then is we're not engaging in that connection and that soothing and that connectedness and that safety. And we can, I'm moving on, let me come back. And this is where it's really difficult to then be compassionate towards ourselves if we're stuck in that threat-based overdrive and we're not engaging in that connection to what it would feel to be safe. What do we need for ourselves to feel safe? And so we can often get stuck in that. And so there are barriers, of course, to that. And I appreciate I'm kind of giving a whistle-stop tour of this. Some of the barriers I've mentioned when we're stuck in that threat system is that, gosh, people think I can't cope. If I feel things, I'll start to fall apart. Sometimes there's this idea that really this is for weak people. It's for wimps. I don't need to soothe myself. I don't need to engage in this, because only people who are weak, strong people just survive through this threat and absolutely fine. And other times it might be that anger. Actually, I'm just too angry to be compassionate. I'm too angry to think about it. And sometimes that's for ourselves, and sometimes that's with other people. And so it was really lovely to, or difficult, that when we were trying to flow compassion out to somebody else, that we were irritated by that anger comes up. And there's something, and it's not to say that you're threatened by that person, but the threat can be emotional to that safety, to that what you like, what you're comfortable with. It doesn't have to be that the other person or the situation is threatening. It could be that actually it just feels really difficult, and that can instill anger. If you're stuck in the drive system, it could be, well, actually other people are relying on me. I can't just drop this and go, because people depend on me. You know, it's my job to care for people. It's my job to do all these things for everybody else. And so I can't really indulge in, you know, what we were thinking about earlier in terms of compassion for other people. It's a luxury. I can't do that. And so that might be a barrier to soothing. You have to keep going. And the one that really comes up quite often is, yeah, but I'm too busy. I'm too busy to stop and think about doing something about this threat. I'm too busy to think about connecting with somebody else and being nice to somebody else. I'm too busy for that because I've got all this stuff to do in the background. So that probably people are, it would have been good to sort of reflect a bit more on this, but I imagine some of this will be resonating with you. So what then I suppose happens is, an example, if we were to sort of work through this, each of you might have a slightly different version of this. But what tends to happen, and what Anna and I certainly hear coming through when we speak to staff, and even when we reflect on our own experiences as people, as humans in our boats as well, sometimes the threat feels really out of control. And we can be really self-critical of, why is this affecting me? Particularly as psychologists, sometimes we sort of sit there going, but we're supposed to be supporting everybody else. Why are we feeling threatened? Why are we feeling angry and upset and guilty and ashamed and all those things? And so that can sometimes feel really out of control. And so we can rush to do more, we can rush to achieve. And when we think about being kind to ourselves, being compassionate towards ourselves, doing self-care, sometimes it can slip into that drive where we're going for a walk because we know we need to do that, but actually it's not coming from a place of soothing. It's not coming from a place of connection to ourselves and other people. It's coming from a place of threat. And so that sometimes can be a barrier in and of itself. And the thing that might get in the way of that is how we see ourselves, what we expect of ourselves, pride sometimes. You know, actually, I'm really proud of the fact that I'm in control. I'm proud of the fact that I'm strong. We have these expectations of ourselves and sometimes of other people, but sometimes there's real injustices, and so it might be that the systems that we're in just don't enable us to do things in the way that we want to, and that could be at work, it could be the teams that we work in, it could be in our families, it could be people that we have, you know, relationships with, it could be wider in society. There are all sorts of things that are really threatening that it's difficult to just put down and ignore and forget. And it feels like we need to be just doing something to resolve those or address those, or perhaps we can't because then we're stuck in that threat because of what those injustices mean to us. And what we can then reach for is those quick fixes. So that might be, I'm just going to go for a walk. I'm just going to go to the gym because everybody says that's the thing that I need to do. But when it's coming from that place of threat rather than a place of soothing, it can be a quick fix that works for a short time, but then doesn't really give you that sense of satisfaction or that connection or that meaning. It might be reaching for a drink just to forget things, just to forget the self-criticism, the guilt and the shame. But of course, what we know is that can come back the next morning or even later that night. I think cake, sometimes I reach for cake. And so these are real quick fixes that we might think that we're soothing and we might think that we're connecting, but really is a challenge. So I'm just conscious of time, and perhaps we don't have much space to reflect on this for ourselves, but possibly after the session, as we go through the day, as we kind of think back and reflect on it, particularly for people watching the recording, if you have space to perhaps pause it and have a think about, you know, what might be coming up for each of us. Where do we spend time? And what else might be coming to mind?
I might just read a comment from the chat, if I may, Sameen, just briefly. Someone says, I think this is a really this is a really good and important session, as more compassionate work, especially from colleagues, but also towards ourselves, is one of the most important things in our jobs and lives, yet probably overlooked and under-recognised. Yet it is harder to put in place than, say, a new laptop, which we might consider more important. So absolutely. And yeah, and someone else said the need to take compassion seriously and make an active effort to incorporate it in our thinking, and the need to do this as an organisation and not just as individuals. I think that is a really interesting point as well. We're focusing more on the individual level here today, but I think that's really important, thinking about at an organisational level, and perhaps people can reflect more on that.
And I suppose even at the organisational level, individual people make up cultures, and so I suppose what's coming to mind is, I suppose, fault and responsibility. And so it might feel like it's not my responsibility to take care of what the organisation should be doing, because it's not your fault. But actually there's some level of responsibility that each of us in our own rights can take in our own roles, in our own systems and teams that we might be in, that if we can model this for ourselves, if we can have an example and a template of what this feels like for us, then perhaps we might encourage others to also do that for themselves. And if more people can do that for themselves, and that then becomes the culture, that's where then systems can start to change as well and shift. And it would be brilliant to spend a bit more time kind of thinking about that. And I hope that people feel that they're able to do that after the session. I think sometimes we have this sense that when we rebalance ourselves, it's about making the soothing much bigger, forgetting the threat and forgetting the stuff that we've got to do and just focusing on the soothing. But actually that's not what we're saying. Sometimes it might be helpful. So, when you take a holiday, you just go away for the weekend and you just focus on yourself. That's really helpful. And that's not selfish. That enables you to do some of the drive stuff. It enables you to do some of the things that you might want to do. But ultimately, compassion is about rebalancing yourself. And so recognizing that there will always be some threat. There'll always be a need to do stuff and achieve things, and that's really positive. But it's also important to kind of rebalance ourselves. And so thinking about flowing compassion at all levels. And so sometimes we have this sense that, we're fine, we're okay, and telling everybody else that we're absolutely fine. But we've got these shadows inside of us about things that are not okay. And the less we engage with those, the blacker and the denser that they become, the harder they become to deal with. But actually other people can't see them because we're putting on this sense of, actually that's really threatening to engage with that, and so I'm okay, I'm fine, it's all right. And actually organisations will do that as well. Organisations will, on the face of it, say actually things are okay. We might be winning awards, we might be getting pats on the backs, we might be clearing waiting lists, we might be ticking things off on the spreadsheets, we might be balancing the books. We might be curing people, and discharging them. We might be, sending people home after they've had a stint in social care. But there's things going on in the background that are really tricky. And it's only when we can flow compassion to ourselves and those parts of ourselves, and systems can flow compassion towards themselves, that we can then start doing that for each other in that kind of framework. And so the idea, I suppose, is we're really tempted to just jump towards fixing things, sticking the fire engine on and kind of neenawing away to where you might feel burnt out, where you might feel like we just need to fix this. Whereas actually, I suppose what Anna and I invite you to think about is to be the milk float, where you've really got precious cargo that you're carrying, these feelings, these emotions that we talked about in terms of, feeling isolated, feeling lonely, feeling tired and exhausted. These are things that need to be handled with care rather than kind of rushing to fix some of those. And so sometimes this we thought was a useful kind of analogy to use.
So I'm just aware people are having to leave. Totally understand. We'll just continue for a couple of minutes, but thank you all for attending, and totally understand if you do have to leave. So just thinking about how we can flow compassion towards ourselves, and thinking about what brings us peace, meaning, purpose and joy, and how important those things are for us, and thinking about how we might move forward. You know, we need to connect with the things outside of ourselves that give us these things, and you know, that might be connecting with other people, could be, you know, like journaling there, it could be engaging with nature, comedy, being outside in the great outdoors, you know, eating good food, that sort of thing. And it's really important for us to connect with these things, and to, you know, think about how we can find those things. So purpose and meaning can be really, really important as well to help us get through really difficult periods in our lives, and to make meaning and sense out of them. Yeah.
Okay. Just the final thing from us before we hand you back over to Robert. Is thinking about how we might step out of this space compassionately. And so whether this is something you'd like to do in the chat or just in your own minds, I suppose 3 things that you're going to try and leave behind, things that you might have been carrying, things that you might have been thinking, ideas that you might have had, keep them and kind of chuck them away metaphorically over your shoulder, and 3 things that you might take forward. And I wonder if it's the things that you'll take forward that might be helpful to put in the chat. And the chat will be active, I suppose, on Teams as well after you've left the session as well. And whether you want to take, if you can, if you've got the space, if you've got a couple of minutes before the next thing or the next meeting or the next appointment that you've got to go to, I'd really invite you to think about what 3 things you're going to take forward from the session today. I'm sure I can sort of see that things are probably coming through on the chat, but what I'll do now is I'll hand you back over to Robert, and so I'll stop sharing.
Really brilliant. Thank you, Sameen and Anna. I think just a really thoughtful and provoking session to make us think about compassion of ourselves and others. And you know, the chat is reflecting that as well. And I'm sure, you know, Anna, you've been going through the chat as it's been coming through, and Sameen, I'd say have a look through some of the comments that are coming in as well. There's lots of thanks for the session. And I think, you know, that's reflected in the content that you've delivered. And as I say, it's been really thought-provoking, and it's made us, well, me in particular, step back and think about myself as well, and maybe what do I need to do a bit differently. So a massive thank you to both of you. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen to just go through some of the final slides that we have as well. So, okay. So we'd really appreciate you taking the time to provide us with some feedback, in particular about this session, and also for the other sessions that you've possibly taken part in across the week. My colleague will have posted in the chat the link to the Microsoft Forms. It's really important to give us this feedback as it helps us to shape future events. And also by submitting your feedback, you'll automatically be entered into a free prize draw. And that's a fantastic opportunity to win a virtual wellbeing festival goodie bag, which will include goodies as books that you can see on screen, but other goodies as well as a reminder of the festival. So remember the saying, you need to be in it to win it. So we'd really appreciate you taking the time to complete that piece of feedback for us. Okay. So please remember that if you've missed a session or would like to watch a session again, please visit the NHCP website and you can watch all the sessions again on catch up. Please also share with colleagues, especially those that haven't been able to join us today. Really go back and encourage them to watch today's session, and even for yourself, watch that again. And I think, as Sameen said as well, you know, in particular parts where you could pause the video and have some reflection as well. So really think about that. But do encourage others to go to the website, have a look at these whole range of now resources that are available for you. Also, not forgetting that whilst today is our last day, we do have other pre-recorded content on the website and 2 keynote speakers this afternoon. So we've got Gareth Thomas at 12 o'clock, and then we also have Ruby Wax at 2:30 with the close at 4 o'clock of the festival. So please do make sure you go and look at some of these resources. So also we have challenges that were set across the week, and you can continue some of these challenges beyond this week, in particular the step challenge. You know, get active with the team and with other teams across your organisations. How many steps can you do? In particular, walking up and down the flights of stairs. We also have a photography challenge, so each day there's a different theme. So please do go onto the website to have a look at that and then post your photos on Twitter. We're also asking people to tell us what their favourite songs are. What gives you motivation? What drives you? What makes you feel good? Please tell us these songs, and we're creating a playlist that will be available on Spotify for Northamptonshire Wellbeing. And further information is available on the NHCP website, as well as some digital resources we've made available. We'd like you to get social, and that's to make as much noise as you can about what we're doing in the county to support our own wellbeing and the wellbeing of others. You can do this in many ways as seen on the screen, so Twitter, Insta and Facebook. So our handles are there for NHCP. And then also we've put some hashtags in, so Northants Wellbeing and VWBF 2021. So please do get those trending across social media. Like I say, just telling people what we're doing in the county to support our own wellbeing. And then it's also important to acknowledge that during particular sessions across the Wellbeing Festival, you may have been affected by personal stories or information that you've heard, and that you can access additional support to help you. Please remember, it's okay not to be okay, and following support is available to you. So we have the Stronger Together Hub, which is providing wellbeing support to health and social care colleagues in Northamptonshire. We also have the Changing Minds IAP service, and details are on the screen, and also the mental health number, again, details on the screen. So please do reach out for any additional support that you need beyond the Wellbeing Festival as well. And then finally, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Sameen and Anna for joining us today and sharing and taking us on this compassion journey. It's been really thought-provoking, as I've said, so thank you for taking the time to join us. Thank you to the team behind the scenes, ensuring the smooth running of the session, and to each and every one of you for joining us today to take part in the session today and for everything that you do every day. But do remember, take some time for you and do something that's going to be beneficial to you and your well-being. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.